What's going on, my brother? How you doing, man?
Hey, how you feel? How you fellas doing today?
I'm doing good. I'm doing wonderful, man. I'm glad to have you on. For those of y'all who don't know, you better know. Okay, this guy is a Washington Commanders insider, and he has his own, I guess, his media company. After practice, if I'm not mistaken. Late Lewis Jr., if you want to introduce yourself properly, I think I did a decent job so far, but you can carry on if you want.
That's cool. Yeah. So, insider with the team, with the Commanders and the NFL, and uh, owner of Sports Journey. You can check that out on sportsjourney.com. And the podcast is actually now the Lake Lewis Show. So,
Okay.
as of tomorrow, you'll see new episodes and all that good stuff. So, yeah, appreciate you guys having me back on.
Yeah, definitely. And I want to, first of all, I want to thank you for coming on. Obviously, we are moving and grooving out here. Times could be tricky, schedules could be busy, but the fact that you came on and showing us support, new media is where it's at. We appreciate it. I really want to get right into it, man, because I don't want
Sure.
to waste nobody time here. Jayden Daniels, obviously, he got named the starter QB1. And it's funny because I think there's a lot of talk about him protecting the football, right? There was one play in particular in the last preseason game that happened, and I believe he scrambled for about 13 yards, if I'm not mistaken, and then he slid. Well, he didn't slide. He actually got hit, and then immediately he looks at Dan Quinn as if he knew he was going to get an earful. Can you talk about, them prioritizing his ability to slide and get out of harm's way and what that means for his career and why that's very important?
Well, first of all, and I hate to say this, but some of my colleagues, just create things that aren't there. He knows he needs to slide at certain times, but I'm going to tell you this: as a competitor, if that was a regular season game, he would have turned it up the field, so there would have been no slide. He would have tried to keep going, and I think this, unfortunately, some of the people that cover this team that you can tell I'm a little frustrated with it. I just think that it's always a negative narrative that gets pushed out
Mm.
from the building. And today at practice, I'm literally just getting in the house from practice, and it was high spirited. And a couple of us were just saying, man, the cloud has been lifted here. It's not the same. There's nothing about the setup that's the same. And obviously, it starts with Adam Peters and Dan Quinn, but it naturally also starts with your quarterback. And listen, guys, this guy, he looks incredible. Like, I'm not blowing smoke here. This is my 15th year covering the NFL, and I can tell you, this guy has all the goods to not just be, the answer at quarterback for the Commanders long term. He's going to put his name in the ranks of some of the best quarterbacks in the league, especially young quarterbacks. I mean, he's got all those tools. So as far as the sliding and things like that, that's a narrative that you place on a running quarterback. Jayden's not a running quarterback. He's a pocket quarterback, 100%, who just happens to be dynamic in his running ability. But he doesn't look to run the ball first. He looks and he makes his reads. Um, I've told people all training camp, he may have run the football today, ran the ball 2, 3 times. He may have run the football 10 times total coming up into today. He just doesn't run the ball. But then you saw in the games that he can take off on you. We knew he could do that going back to LSU and Arizona State.
Yeah, Lake, what's going on, man? Appreciate
Hey, what's
you
going on?
hopping on with us. One thing I wanted to say, man, it's funny. Not only Jayden Daniels, but I feel like this quarterback class as a whole, I'm really impressed with it. We know it's only the preseason, but I'm really not trying to overreact. But I'm watching Caleb Williams, and I'm super high on him. I think the Bears are going to be much improved this season. I see what you're saying with Jayden Daniels. I watched him up closely in the first preseason game against the Jets. I was really impressed with him. I've been very impressed with Bo Nix, Drake May. I know his situation isn't great, but he's looked good. It's unfortunate what happened to J.J. McCarthy, but I think he's set up nicely for the future. And then you have Michael Penix, question marks with him and when exactly he's going to be on the field, but I'm high on him with Atlanta. I'm just asking you, as someone who not only covers the Commanders, but the league in general, I'm trying not to make the same mistake because it's easy to compare this quarterback class to the class of 2021, which also had a lot of hype with Trevor Lawrence and Zach Wilson and Trey Lance and Mac Jones and all those guys. But I just look at these guys' resumes and I see, man, Caleb Williams, he played multiple years in the Big 12 and multiple years in the Pac-12, and he won a Heisman Trophy. I look at Jayden Daniels; he just won a Heisman Trophy playing in the SEC, playing at such a high level at LSU. You have Drake May, who played at North Carolina. Bo Nix transferring to Oregon was the best decision he ever made. Am I crazy to say that this quarterback class could be one of the better ones we've seen in recent memory? And I do think the two guys at the top, Jayden Daniels and Caleb Williams, have a lot to do with that. What are your overall thoughts on this quarterback class as a whole?
I agree with everything you said. I mean, this is potentially a draft class that we'll be talking about years down the road as, potentially, obviously they still have to prove it throughout their careers, but the start of their careers, if it's any indication, yeah, we can be talking about this draft class of quarterbacks as being one of the best ever, if they can continue to ascend. And I also think the thing that helps these young guys at quarterback is the game has changed. There's such an emphasis now on passing the football. Like running backs have kind of been diminished, in today's game. So these guys are coming in and they're not going to be asked to hand the ball off 20, 25 times. They're going to be asked to throw the football 20, 25 times plus in a game. And I think these coordinators are tailoring a lot of their offenses around the strengths of all these players. So that it's not like the old days where they drafted a quarterback, but their systems were strong and already in place, that you had to come in and conform to that system. It's the other way around now. I know in Washington, they're building around what Jayden does well, and he does a lot of things well. So there's really no thing that, going into the Buccaneers game in the first game of the season, that Buccaneer defense and Todd Bowles, who likes to blitz and things like that could be trouble for them, because with Jayden, you're thinking you're going to be blitzing a rookie quarterback. But as you said, Jayden's played a lot of football. You go back to Arizona State and then obviously at LSU, he's played more football than any quarterback outside of Bo Nix. And ironically, look at Bo Nix and what he's doing in Denver. He's got them really excited out in Denver. And we saw him struggle a little bit in the SEC at Auburn. He transfers to Oregon and he lights it up. So I agree with you. I think this draft class potentially has the markings, the makings to be one of the best.
Yeah. Zay, before you get in here, I just want to respond to that take because I think it's a very good take. I just would like to add to that. I think it's a lot of also not only the experience that these guys have under their belt in college, but I also think it's about them being where they're supposed to be schematically, with the coordination, right? So, for example, you have Shane Waldron in Chicago, and he has a lot of play action designs, and I think it will help Caleb be more structured because he's used to playing outside of structure. In college, he was running for his life a lot. He can play more in structure, and I think that will actually help him out a little bit more. And I think with Jayden Daniels, right? I get them mixed up with the NBA player. But I think with him, Cliff Kingsbury, they're going to use those quarterback runs. They're going to go vertical down the field. We all know he took a lot of shots in LSU. So I think that's a good fit as well. And I think with Bo Nix, you got a guy in Sean Payton with a resume. We seen what he did with Drew Brees, and we know he likes quarterbacks that can process and deliver the ball in the middle of the field. And he gets a quarterback with a little bit more mobility than Drew Brees. So I think they are definitely where they're supposed to be. J.J. McCarthy is going to be able to sit and learn and be in a good situation with Kevin O'Connell out there in Minnesota. And then you got Michael Penix, and he's going to be able to sit and learn and develop. So I think a lot of that has to do with not only the experience these guys have, but they being where they're supposed to be.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. I mean, all these guys were selected by teams that, that really wanted them first and foremost. So there was no situation where, you draft a quarterback and then you draft another quarterback later in the draft. It's going to put pressure on the guy that you chose to be the face for your franchise going forward. And I think, you look at Drake May in New England, and it appeared originally that Jacoby Brissett, who was just in Washington last year, was the clear-cut starter. Not so sure now. I do think that in that situation, I do think Jacoby gets the nod, unless something's happened in my 2-hour drive home from practice. I still think that he gets the nod. And it's easier, if you're the Patriots, it's easier to go away from the veteran maybe week 3, week 4, if he's not playing well, to go with the young guy, because now you haven't put a lot of pressure on the young guy. It can't get any worse, so to speak. And now that young guy can develop and just work through the kinks, and people understand it's going to take some time. But in the sense of Caleb and Jayden and possibly Bo Nix, I mean, I think the fan bases are excited to see these guys and see their progression. I don't think people are talking Super Bowl, but I know that people think that they've got themselves some young guns that are going to be, mentioned around the league for years to come.
I'm not sure if you know, but Bo Nix got named the starter over the last couple hours. I'm not sure if you caught that or
Yeah,
not.
I was in the car, so
Yeah.
I appreciate that. But you know what? Doesn't surprise me at all. His play, it's one thing when you see, like I see it here in DC, the veterans are rallying around Jake. It's not one of those things where they're like, yeah, he's got some things he's got to work on, and it's nothing like that. It's the Bobby Wagners, the John Allens, the Terry McLaurin saying, this guy's beating us in the building in the morning, and he's the last one in the building when we're leaving. Like, Jayden is a gym rat. He's a football guy that wants to just soak up as much as he can, and he has this poise and confidence. He'll be 24 during this season. So I think, when you look at the Michael Penix and Jayden and Bo Nix, these guys are more mature than, say, the 21-year-old, or possibly even a 22-year-old. These guys are mature, not just as far as their play on the field and how many games they've started in college, but just as far as their demeanors and how they carry themselves. And that has absolutely won over the Broncos locker room, as well as the Commanders and the Bears on top of that.
How's it going, late? Thank you for the insight on the practices thus far, and appreciate you joining the show.
Thanks.
So I had a take a couple weeks ago about putting a rookie player, quarterback, for instance, in the game too early, because of what it means for the success of the team. Meaning, example, the Chicago Bears. They added all these pieces around Caleb Williams. Oh, they added all these pieces before they drafted Caleb Williams. You got DJ Moore, you drafted Roma Dunes, you bring in Keenan Allen, you bring in Swift. You have all these players around him, and you're starting him day one. You expect this guy to be the starter, and then expectations to win grow exponentially. Do you feel, and I want to know your opinion on putting so much talent around the players so young in their career when they have to develop versus knowing that they have to go after and win it because this roster won't be as good as it will be down the line. I want to know your opinion. Do you feel like it's could hurt a player's development, forcing them to kind of put them in a win now scenario, or is it only going to increase their mentality to be that superstar player that they strive to be?
Well, I think it's natural, like to just think that the more talent you have around you, especially in the professional level, the better you're going to be, just because you have better people around you. And in the situation with Caleb in Chicago, Chicago has a history of not developing their quarterbacks. It's been like that since I've been a kid. And I won't tell you how old I am, but even when Jim McMahon won the Super Bowl, for the Bears, he wasn't their franchise quarterback. He was a quarterback that was hot for that 2-3 year span, but he wasn't a long-term solution at the quarterback position at all. It was running the football and mauling you on defense. Well, I think now in today's game, like I said, because they pass the football so much, they're looking for guys that have seen multiple defensive, fronts in college, and I think in Caleb's situation, playing in the Big 12 at the time, they're not known for defense, and really nor is the Pac-12 on top of that. But you could see the things that he was doing was just special. He showed up. I know last year USC wasn't the best football team, but Caleb's numbers were numbers that most quarterbacks in the country would have, clamored for. So I think for him to be able to have, a perennial Pro Bowler in Keenan Allen on one side, DJ Moore, an emerging star, there as well. And then, of course, you go out and get Roma Dunze, who's he's familiar with, having played against him in Washington when he was University of Washington. That's good. You still have Pettis. I mean, you have Carlos Swift. You have Cole Kmet. I mean, they've got a lot of options for this guy to be successful almost so much that if Chicago doesn't take that next leap, and that leap should be to challenge Detroit, they're not going to beat out Detroit, in my opinion, for that division. I think that division comes down to Detroit and Green Bay. But I think Chicago should drastically close the gap, on those two teams and still be playing meaningful football in December to possibly make it as a wild card. If that doesn't happen, there's going to be a lot of backlash on literally, on Caleb Williams, because they have loaded their team for him to be successful.
Yeah, I think just responding to that, I think every situation is different. I know Tom Brady came out recently and he talked about the dumbing down of the playbook,
Yeah.
which is forcing young guys to immediately step in and win. Whereas Tom Brady was a guy who benefited from being on the bench for a couple years, and coming in for Drew Bledsoe and obviously becoming the GOAT. You had Patrick Mahomes who sat behind Alex Smith, for a year, and then he obviously is a Super Bowl champion, multiple. And I think it just depends on the situation. Like, I think for me, Drake May should sit for a year. I mean, you look at the Patriots roster, should be able to sit 2 years. I mean, come on. The receivers are, iffy to me. Like, there are not a lot of guys who can create that separation. That's why they wanted to trade for Brandon Ayuk. Unfortunately, Brandon Ayuk said no mas. He sees the same thing I see. Stevie Wonder does as well. And I think, having, a situation like the Bears, of course, a rookie could come in there and have success. It just really depends on, some of the nuances and stuff like that. So I think every situation is different. But I got one more question. And then Zach and Zay, if you want to ask y'all final questions, by all means. I've definitely been around that area, the DMV area. My grandmother, she lives in Virginia, which is literally like right by Washington, D.C., right by Maryland. And I remember going into that Walmart one time and I see a lot of Commanders fans, right? I see the jerseys and I almost feel sorry, for those fan people there because they haven't had an opportunity to win a lot. As far as I've been watching football, outside of that 1 year with RG3, where he had one of the best rookie seasons of all time, there's not a lot to cheer for as a Commanders fan or Washington fan, whatever. But how is the area looking? Like, I know you live around that area, I assume. Like, how is that, area feeling? Like, what's the vibes looking like, as far as Jayden McDaniels or Daniels and what he could bring to the team, and how's the team, looking? How's the aura of the team, not only the neighborhood, but the team as well?
Yeah, I mean, great question. Like I said, I'm a lot older than you guys, and I remember the Super Bowls. I remember when this team was the Patriots, and I mean that sincerely. They were in 5 NFC championships and 4 Super Bowls in a 9-year span. I mean, you're always expecting that. Well, over the last 30 years, 25 years, it's been bad, and I think now that for some of the older fans like myself who remember the good old days, we remember the way the team looked and as far as in preseason. We remember how they looked when they drafted people, and there were no question marks as far as the draft picks. And I think this is the first time, and it just so happens to be they have a real general manager in Adam Peters who knows what he's doing. He's a talent evaluator. That's what his strength is. They hadn't had that before. They had coaches picking players. They had front office people picking players. It just wasn't a normal setup, and it showed. The product showed. You look at Emmanuel Forbes last year, your first round draft pick. That was a huge whiff on a player when Christian Gonzalez was sitting right there, right behind him. And now you hear all the talk about how dominant Christian Gonzalez looks in New England, and you hear the talk of, is Emmanuel Forbes even worth keeping on the team? I mean, it's things like that. So now you have a general manager in Adam Peters who has a great track record from his days in New England to San Francisco as an assistant to now him being the man. And this draft class that he's put together looks really impressive. I mean, they have potentially 4 to 5 starters out of this draft class, not because, the talent behind them wasn't any good. It's because these guys were just that good and he hit on something. So I think the fan base here is excited. I think obviously a lot of them are in a wait and see approach. I can tell you a lot of them feel like there's life here now and there's no black cloud over the facility. And as long as myself and my colleagues, are continuously putting out the truth of what we see at practice, and I haven't seen anything really bad. I haven't. With this team, the secondary is a little shaky. Not the safeties. The safeties are going to be a strength, but the corners, they're a little shaky right now, and that's the truth. So, excuse me. Outside of that, I would say, maybe if they had a Christian Gonzalez on there at corner, I would tell you this team is really capable of making some noise, because I do think that they have a lot of talent. I think Terry McLaurin and Jahan Dotson, De'Ami Brown, Zach Ertz at tight end looks really good, like he's found the fountain of youth. Brian Robinson, running back, Austin Eckler. I mean, they have some talent. They really do. And most importantly, they're being coached. Guys, people don't talk about this enough, but this staff that Dan Quinn put together is an all-star coaching staff. And it's a coaching staff of former players who are great communicators. I mean, the linebacker coach is Ken Norton Jr. Defensive line coach is Daryl Tapp. These are all guys that played in the league and played at a high level. Their secondary coach came from the Steelers where he played. You look at Bobby Ingram, wide receiver coach. Then, of course, you have Cliff Kingsbury as your offensive coordinator, and Coach Anthony Lynn, who is the head coach in the league. He's your running backs coach. So I'm telling you, Dan Quinn knew what he was doing. Adam Peters, they knew what they were doing. And I think that you're going to see marked improvement from this team because they're going to be coached properly.
Like, it's funny on that note, because before we let you go, I wanted to get into this coaching staff a little more, and I'm just going to be completely blunt. I'm going to be completely honest with you. Like, I love Adam Peters. I think that was a great hire, bringing him in from San Francisco. But I remember the Commanders were the last team this offseason to hire a head coach in the cycle. And I'm not going to lie to you, like, I thought that Ben Johnson in Washington was a match made in heaven. I thought they were going to get him. We know what happened. He didn't even interview with the team. He wanted to stay in Detroit. That was super disappointing. And look, like, I was just pretty unimpressed with Dan Quinn when he was the head coach of the Atlanta Falcons. I know he got them to the Super Bowl, but we know what happened then. And I brought this up last week with our guest that came on. I don't think it's fair that Kyle Shanahan is really the face of that collapse in the Super Bowl when he wasn't the head coach of that team. It was Dan Quinn who could have told him, like, yo, run the ball a little bit, and maybe that game would have ended differently. I wasn't too impressed with his stint in Atlanta after that. Would you feel any different about this Commanders team right now if Jayden Daniels was paired with Ben Johnson? And look, Cliff Kingsbury, he might be good. He might not be. He had some moments in Arizona. Like, we all know how it ended. I'm kind of 50-50 on him. I'm not really sure how this is going to go in Washington, but I'm just telling you, man, like, if Jayden Daniels was paired with Ben Johnson, I think the Commanders could challenge for a playoff team and compete for as a playoff team this year. I don't really know if I feel the same way about this coaching staff. So tell me if I'm right or wrong to be skeptical.
Well, I love coming on here, but I got to tell you, my friend, you're wrong on this one. and I say that because the concepts and the things that, that are Jayden's strengths are ironically the same things that Cliff Kingsbury did with Kyler Murray, did with Patrick Mahomes, did with Baker Mayfield. So he's been around some pretty good and effective quarterbacks. And I think with Jayden, he has a guy that may be, and I'm saying this, he may be the most dynamic of all of them. And I'm not saying he's better than Patrick Mahomes before anyone comes at me, nor am I saying he's better than Kyler Murray. But what I'm saying is the potential for everything that he brings to the table, big arm, his running skills are second to no one. Like, the only guy in the NFL that you can literally prop up and say is more dynamic of a runner, that's Lamar Jackson. We know that. But outside of that, I'm telling you what I see with my own eyes. This guy is special, and I think the league is going to see that. And I do like him with Dan Quinn. The one thing that Dan Quinn has done that is a little different from the coaches that I've covered in the past is he's brought together and so just not to stray here, but I talked to Scott Pioli, former GM in Atlanta. He was there when Dan Quinn and Kyle Shanahan were there. And he obviously, Scott Pioli has history in New England with Belichick when they won those Super Bowls there. We talked on the sidelines a couple of weeks ago, and he was just like, what you see with Adam Peters, who, by the way, was in New England with him too. he was like, what you see with these guys is genuine. They're great football guys, but they're even better people. And that's the atmosphere that's in Washington right now. That's the atmosphere when we're out at practice, not just, amongst the players, but even us in the media. We've been included now. We're not looked at as the outcast. What are you going to talk about? We're talked to on a first name basis, literally, and that's never been done. So I think that he's the right person for right now. And I think that these other coaches he's letting coach, remember Joe Witt Jr., had some pretty impressive, defenses in Dallas with Dan Quinn. He's the defensive coordinator. So I think that there's a buzz in the building amongst the players. I know Terry McLaurin told me he's happy. They get it. They're using him like when he was at Ohio State, where he could use that 4.2 speed. You three probably don't even know Terry McLaurin has 4.2 speed because he's never been used that way. Well, now they're letting the offense open itself up because of Jayden. So I literally think Washington has a chance to be a wild card football team. I truly believe that. If you told me right now to give you a number on wins for them, I'd cap it at 9. But 9 might get you in as a wild card if things really, go off, and you can steal a game or two and you can get to 10. I mean, you're definitely going to be a wild card team. But I think their window right now is between 8 and 10, and I think the number is 9.
I'll just say this. I just got to bounce, but I'll just say this like in response to that. If Washington does that, if they win 9 games, Dan Quinn, I'll vote for him coach of the year. I'll just have to believe it until I see it.
Okay, cool.
Hey,
remember, I know things didn't work out in Atlanta the way they wanted to, and he'll be the first person to tell you. He's told us many times that he's learned from his opportunity. He learned how a head coach now, he wanted to do things a little differently and maybe delegate a little bit more, but know when to lean in. Like you said, maybe tell Kyle, listen, you got to run the football here. He didn't do that then, but I'm sure now from experience, just like with everything we do, you get better with experience. Your show is really good now. Not that it was never any good, but it's just going to continuously get better because you guys have more experience. I think that's the thing with Dan Quinn right now is that he did something to wow Adam Peters and Josh Harris, the owner, for them to hire him, because there still were some other names out on the board that, they just didn't give those guys second and third interviews. They were giving them to Dan Quinn. And naturally, when you look at Dan Quinn's track record, everywhere he's been successful, actually. I know people say, oh, what about Atlanta? Well, he took Atlanta to the Super Bowl. I mean, and they did give up that 28-point lead. I get it. But still, they were in the Super Bowl. You look at what he did with the Seahawks. They were in back-to-back Super Bowls strictly because of their defense. And they should have had 2 back-to-back Super Bowl wins. It wasn't their defense that failed. It was Pete Carroll and that offensive play call where they didn't turn around and get a ball to Marshawn Lynch. And then you look at the past few years in Dallas. Dallas's defense actually has led the NFL in turnovers. So they've done some things correctly. I just think that, and he did that in Dallas without 2 really big interior linemen on the defense. He did that with speed. Well, now he's got a little bit of speed in Washington. He went out and brought back Bobby Wagner. Frankie Louvu came over in free agency, who's going to be a stud. And then, of course, in the middle of the field, you have 2 Pro Bowlers in John Allen and Daron Payne. He's never had that to work with. So I'm curious to see, how everything pans out.
Overall, I like the Commanders offseason, but my lasting memory of Dan Quinn is his defense getting run out of the building by Jordan Love and the Packers. So
yeah, but everything. The one thing that you could say in that game, and I keep telling people this, they were never able to play situational football in that game because Dak wet the bed and the defense couldn't stop Jordan Love. So they never could pair up both sides of the ball, and they both just had disastrous days. Again, when your offensive line, Green Bay's offensive line, was more physical and manhandled Dallas's smaller defensive linemen, that's not going to be the case in Washington. I mean, and then they drafted Jerzon Newton, too, from Illinois, the Big Ten Defensive Player of the Year. He just happens to be another tackle who looks really good, by the way, to pair up with John Allen and Daron Payne. And he brought over a lot of guys from that Dallas defense, Dorrance Armstrong, Dante Fowler. I mean, he brought in some guys that know the system So I'm really curious, guys, because Jeremy Chin came over from Carolina. He was, 4 years ago, he was the defensive rookie of the year runner-up to, ironically, Chase Young, who was here. So there's some talent in the building. They just have to put it all together, and it has to come to fruition on Sundays.
No doubt. All right, guys. Like,
All
it's
right,
great to
Zach.
see you. Have a great night, everyone.
All right, Zach. You be good, man.
Okay,
You too.
appreciate you guys.
My last question was mainly focused on Jahan Dotson. I've been seeing news that there's not a worry, but there's a rumor going around that he's looking as the roster cut that the Washington Football Commanders will be making.
Yeah.
What have you been seeing from him during camps? As he's taking a step back drastically, where he looks unplayable, or is it just guys out there just outplaying him at every position essentially?
That's a good question. I mean, we talked about it today at practice. Jahan is he's uber talented. He's a first round draft pick. He has the talent. And his rookie year, he looked really good. I mean, there was grumblings amongst us in the media that he could be just as good as Terry long term. Well, I think what happened to Jahan, unfortunately, happened to a lot of the players. Last year was just such of a train wreck. Eric Bieniemy, didn't utilize certain guys the way they could have been utilized. Eric was my guy too, but he wasn't doing right by some of these guys. And Brian Robinson Jr., running back, didn't get the ball at all. I mean, and these are dynamic football players who now in Cliff Kingsbury's structure, everyone's going to touch the ball. They're going to feed the hot guy too. And I think with Jahan, his confidence is a little shot, I think, from last year. And I think that, he just needs to get back out there having fun. I told somebody, tomorrow, so I'm going to try to pull him aside. We're Penn State guys. So in his position, Coach Bobby Ingram went to school with me at Penn State. We played there. So I just, I'm going to pull him aside and just tell him, man, you got to get back to that swagger that you had your rookie year, where you actually told people publicly that you didn't feel like anyone could stop you. Now he's stopping himself, and that's mental. So that happens, it especially happens with young guys that, hit with a little bit of adversity, but I don't think there's any truth at all to him being cut. I can tell you right now, that's not going to happen.
Okay. Yeah, this is the last question that we have for you, Lake. And I think for me, when Austin Eckler signed here with this team initially, I was like, I don't know, because it's not the same Austin Eckler of old, right? We saw him last year. He had injuries, obviously. He looked a little bit slower last year, and we all get caught up with the narratives of running backs and how they decline after a certain period of time. And some of that is justifiable based on the track record. But I remember seeing him in an interview after the first preseason game, and I forgot totally what he said. I don't even remember what he said. But all I remember is at that time, I'm like, oh, he's going to bring some veteranship to that team that could be useful for that rookie quarterback. Would you agree with me with that statement?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, Austin Eckler is definitely a pro's pro, and the guys in the locker room, the younger guys, respect him. And see, guys, that's something that's really important for any team. Unfortunately for Washington over the years, they haven't had a guy that's done it at such a high level consistently to have a little bit of cachet around the league. Well, Austin Eckler's respected around the NFL big time, and I think for him, he didn't come to Washington knowing he had to be the man, because he's not going to be. He's just going to be part of the cog. He's going to be, not even, I don't even want to say a key cog, but he's going to be an important cog. But Brian Robinson is going to be your running back. He's the do-it-all threat. He can catch the ball too. And I think Brian obviously benefits from having a true pro and veteran in Austin who can show him how to do things that no other back he's played with could, because none of them had that kind of pedigree. The other thing that's going to help is that Austin, had his success in Los Angeles, before that, the Chargers, San Diego, with, ironically, Coach Anthony Lynn, who was his head coach in LA. So he's the running backs coach now. And if you know anything about Anthony Lynn, he's revered around the NFL for being one of the best running back coaches in football. So these guys benefit from that. And I think Austin Eckler is going to have a really nice year. I don't think he's going to have all, gaudy numbers, eye-dropping numbers, but he's a red zone threat. That's what his career is based on. And I think that they're going to utilize him in their red zone packages. So, I could see Austin Eckler pulling in 3-4 touchdowns this year. Maybe rushing for 300 yards, maybe catching the football for 250, 300 yards. If you can get that from him as a backup, that's pretty good.
All right, Mr. Lake Lewis Jr., man, I appreciate you for stopping by here on the show, and I'm looking forward to the next time we do this, and I hope you have a good time and accomplish a lot more, even though you already accomplished a lot, to that next time.
All right, guys, I appreciate you having me on. Have a good one.
You too.
Appreciate it.
Please like and subscribe for all the up-to-date content. You've been slinging shows left and right, slinging content left and right. Please don't miss anything. If you do, like, subscribe, leave a comment, or leave a question, something you may want to answer, something you may have. All ideas are great ideas. Nothing's a dumb question.